One of the most obvious ways to keep a homestead warm is to burn firewood, but firewood can be really expensive, or if you don't have an endless amount of land to cut down wood, you might not be able to burn firewood all the time. A cord of wood is not cheap, and in fact, I've found that running a diesel air heater year round, as long as I want to, which out here in the middle of the high desert, it's a good 6-7 months that I need to run heat. And when I need it, I run it 24/7. I'm able to do that for about $600 in fuel each year, which really isn't that bad. $600 a year to stay completely comfortable throughout the entire winter. And the cold stretches into several months of, spring and fall, because it might, like today, it's going to be 90 degrees today. It's going to be 45 degrees in the morning. And that huge difference is what makes 45 degrees feel so darn cold. So today's an ideal day to make sure we're set up and prepared to have some heat. It's important to have redundancy in all things. I have propane here, so in an emergency I can run my propane burner for heat. I have an air conditioning unit that has a heat pump in it, so I could run that as long as I have energy in my battery bank. If I really had to, I could start the camper van and run heat that way. And of course, I have a wood burning stove, and in an emergency, I could go in and set up next to my wood burning stove and stay warm that way. But my very favorite, and what seems to be the most efficient way for me to create heat on the homestead as much as I want to, is diesel air heaters. It looks like this heater comes with a pretty comprehensive, there's 21 pages in English on how to set this up and how to use this unit. This unit comes with one of these style fuel tanks. I think I'll use one of my old cube ones because it'll just stack up better the way that I want it. But you could definitely set this up in your vehicle somehow. Here's the plate. You can use this as a stencil for where to cut your holes. One has a spot for the fuel line. In here we have your exhaust. Here's the exhaust. When you orient this, there's a drip hole on the bottom. So orient it this way so that hole faces the ground, just in case any condensation and moisture builds up. Here's your fuel pump. You want to make sure that this is oriented the correct way so that you're pumping fuel into the system. You've got a wire harness here. This is nice. You can divert the hot air in different directions. Exhaust, fuel line, and a nice little head to point the heat where you want it. And finally, the diesel air heater itself. This is the bottom of the unit, and this is a pretty sharp looking unit. I've never had one that they went ahead and colored the plastic, so it's a dark blue and kind of a red orange color. And then you've got your controller and a fob. Here's the plate that comes with this diesel air heater. There's a couple holes for screws, slots, so you can mount the unit to the plate. There's a hole for the fuel line. There's one for exhaust and intake. So I can bolt this together, and then I can mount this to the wood, and that will create a barrier so that we're not heating the wood up too much. Also, I made the holes large, and I use exhaust tape to wrap the exhaust to make sure that we're not burning the wood. And then below that, of course, is metal as well. I appreciate that they included a fuel filter, because I always put a fuel filter in the line to prevent contamination from getting in and plugging things up inside the diesel air heater. And they sent many other little components, such as a buffer pad for your fuel pump to minimize the noise that it makes. Zip ties, hose clamps, brackets. These are pinchers for your fuel line. The unit itself has a connector that comes off of it. The controller has a connector, and then those connect to the wire harness here. So this will simply go to my battery bank for 12 volt. There's a positive and negative, and then there's a connector for the fuel pump, for the heater, and for the controller. And there's also a fuse. So I have my diesel air heater mounted. It's nice and tight. I was able to just barely fit my cube fuel tank in the back. Here's the tube on top. This makes it easy for me to fill it with a gas tank or a fuel tank. I have my fuel pump set up at an angle here. This end that you connect the electronics to, this is the end that pushes up into the diesel heater. The lower end comes around to the fuel filter, and the large end of this fuel filter goes toward the fuel tank. So fuel comes from the fuel tank through the filter in to the fuel pump, and having it angled like this allows the pump to perform better. So it pumps the fuel up and then down that line into the bottom of the diesel heater, and that's how it'll prime and kick itself on. And then I ran a line across to a fuse box that I have on the side of my counter, and that's where I'm going to mount the controller. So here you can see the power button. It looks like it has 12 volts. Okay, so I just had to hold the power button for a moment. This is the very first time it's running. I haven't even primed the system yet, and so we'll see how it performs, or if it needs to be manually primed. I have a charge controller under the counter, which I hear much louder. This fan I can barely hear at all. I can hear the fuel pump kicking on. You can see a little image for the fuel pump. You can see an intake and an out, or an exhaust. It will take time for it to get fuel, but you see there's already fuel coming through the fuel filter. I can see the fuel. There's a little bubble here. You see that? This shows how close the fuel is, in fact, to getting to the filter. And once this last inch is achieved, it should be able to prime the pump, and everything should be able to start up and work just right. And I can see fuel coming through the other end here. And I do see some bubbles in the line, but they should work themselves out here shortly. I didn't want to edit this part much so that people might have more faith in setting up their system the first time and understanding just how long it takes to get it up and running their first attempt. If you have a long piece of line, you'll absolutely want to prime it the first time. And there's several different controllers. I believe on this controller, if you hold the up and down arrow at the same time, it'll enter prime mode. So we'll see what happens here in a minute. So it just attempted to start. It didn't get everything going perfectly the first attempt. So I think that the system will cool down a bit and then give it another try before it calls it a failed attempt, I believe. I can hear the pump kick back on. Giving it another go. I believe that it's kicking on. I think I smelled a little combustion. It's still cool air so far. It feels like it's warming up. It's definitely increasing in heat. The pump is starting to pump faster. The fan is starting to blow harder. These are signs that it's working, that you might be used to if you've used one of these many times. I smell more combustion. It sounds like things are picking up. There, now that my controller is off in the counter there, you can hear how quiet this is. The way I have the fuel pump mounted, it's not touching any surfaces directly. I've used a fat screw in the past to attach this to the intake, and the pump is floating mid-air, which allows it to be much more quiet than if the metal was touching the ground or anything else. The heat is definitely picking up, and I can tell that this has been a successful start. I didn't have to prime it at all the first time. It just went ahead and did it. It didn't even complete a full cycle and call it quits. It gave it a shot, cooled it, tried a second time, and everything fired up exactly the way that it should. I haven't even installed the intake cover or the exhaust on the bottom yet, so this needs to go on next, and so does the air intake. I didn't even have to program the remote. I simply gave it a try and it worked. I turned up the heat, I turned it down, I just turned the unit off. No problem at all with the remote control, so that's nice. The controller just mounted right here on the side of the counter, so that's nice. And you know, I live in my camper van here, and I can just simply hang this up here, hang my key fob up here, and in the night I can reach up and just hit the button, turn it on, turn it off, turn it up, turn it down. When you're looking for a place to install your diesel air heater, you'll want to make sure it's pretty easily accessible. You want to make sure that you can put two holes large enough for the intake and exhaust safely in the floor of the vehicle. So you got to make sure there's nothing underneath that will cause any issues. You want to be able to just open a door and fill it with fuel if you can. That's a lot easier than carrying fuel into the vehicle to fill the tank. Or at least be able to access the tank, even if you do run a line to it. But the shorter the line, probably the better. One of the biggest tricks is to keep your pump at about a 45-degree angle. If it's oriented in a funny situation, then it won't pump fuel and you'll have issues. And if you're new to diesel air heaters, you might not know why it's not working. Just inside the door here to my camper van, I have a space where I have had a diesel heater set up for years now. And the thing about the Chinese diesel heaters is they seem to go out every year or two, and you got to rebuild them or whatnot. And this time I decided to just get a brand new unit. So I already have the holes lined up down here, and that will make it easy to run my exhaust and my air intake. The other reason for this location is I've had different types of fuel tanks. Sometimes they come like this. This is for a diesel air heater inside my shop, and it's easy to top off right here while I'm topping off the camper van diesel. So that's why that one's there. Sometimes they come in that shape, and so depending on, maybe you would mount that back here, and sometimes they come shaped like the diesel air heater and you can stack it on top, which I've done before, built a box to surround it, and I can just top off the fuel from the top. And in the camper van, I keep a long tube on the tank, so it just is really easy to get a can in there to fill it up. So here's a final look just at the entrance of the door to the camper van. The heater is all set up, everything's ready to go. I'm really happy with how easy it was to set up. I do have the learning curve down. I've built and rebuilt a bunch of these, and I've used them for years, and so I do have that advantage. But so do you now. If you just watch this video, most of the simple questions are kind of answered. You know, what angle do you set up your fuel pump, how to mount your exhaust. There's actually a little drain on the bottom to keep it from holding fluid. I've explained all of the little things along the way that it takes time to learn, so that you can just get yours up and running right away.